My wife's funeral was on a Saturday in February, and I shook 1,000 hands that day, or so it felt. People I knew well, people I barely knew, people who had worked with her, people from our church, neighbors, old friends. They all came because she had been that kind of person, the kind who accumulated genuine connections without effort. I stood at the front of that reception hall for 3 hours, and I shook hands and accepted embraces and said thank you and nodded at things people told me about her that I already knew and some things I did not. And then, near the end, a man I had never seen before came through the line. He did not speak. He shook my hand, and when he let go, something stayed in my palm. I looked down. A small brass key, and written in ink on the small paper tag attached to it were 2 words, Room 24. The man was gone before I looked up. Welcome to Grandma Payback Stories. I am Grandma. If you have been here before, you know that I bring you stories where the truth is stranger than anything invented, where justice finds a way when it seems like it cannot, and where the people who try to bury secrets discover that secrets have an extraordinary will to surface. Before we go any further, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Every week there is a new story here, and I am so grateful for every person who comes to sit with me for them. Let us talk about James, his late wife Miriam, the brass key, and Room 24. James was 67 years old when Miriam died. They had been together for 28 years, married for 25 of them. She had been 63, too young, gone from a stroke that arrived without warning on a Tuesday morning while she was in the kitchen making breakfast. James had found her when he came downstairs, and the speed of her absence had been something he was not prepared for, because you are never prepared for it, no matter what you tell yourself in advance. Miriam had been a woman of considerable energy and considerable charm, and a social life that James had always found slightly larger than his own. She knew more people. She remembered more details about them. She maintained more connections across more years. James had found this quality admirable and slightly mysterious. He was a quieter person. He had always felt that she reached out into the world further than he did, and that this was simply the difference between them and not anything to wonder about. He was wrong about that. She had been reaching into a part of the world he had never seen, and she had been doing it with intention and with care. And the man with the brass key was the one who had decided, for reasons James would not fully understand for several weeks, that James deserved to know. James stood in the reception hall holding the key after the last guests left, and his children were helping the staff clear the tables, and no one was looking at him. He looked at the key for a long time. Room 24. He thought about hotels, motels, apartment buildings, storage facilities, the various places in the world that organized their doors by number. He thought about the man who had been perhaps in his early 40s, well-dressed, composed, carrying grief in his face that had not looked like the general grief of an acquaintance but something more personal. He said nothing to his children that evening. He put the key in the pocket of his jacket, hung the jacket in the closet, and sat with the knowledge that he had a choice to make. He could put the key somewhere and not pursue it and live the rest of his life with that an open door between him and whatever was on the other side. Or he could follow it. He had known Miriam for 28 years. He had believed he knew her completely. He thought about whether there was anything in those 28 years that had made him wonder, anything he had set aside or not examined fully. He was honest with himself in the way that grief sometimes makes possible, and he found 2 or 3 things. A period of unusual distraction 3 years ago that she had attributed to work, a phone she had replaced suddenly citing a software problem, a hotel charge on a shared card that she had explained as a conference in a city that he had never followed up on. Alone, each of these things meant nothing. Together, they made a shape. He drove to the hotel nearest their home the next morning. He described the key to the front desk manager, who examined it and shook her head. Not their key style. He drove to the next closest hotel. Same answer. On the fourth hotel, a mid-range business property 20 minutes from their house, the manager looked at the key and said, "That looks like one of ours. The older style, before we went to card keys, we kept some of the original rooms on the brass key system for long-term guests who preferred it. Room 24 is one of those rooms." James asked when room 24 had last been occupied under a long-term arrangement. The manager said she would need to check records. She checked. She came back with an expression that was careful and professional. She said, room 24 had been rented continuously for years under a single guest name. The arrangement had been cancelled 1 week ago by the guest's estate. The guest's name was Miriam. The manager gave James access to room 24 after he provided documentation establishing that he was Miriam's surviving spouse and the executor of her estate. She brought him there herself and unlocked the door with her master key and then stood back and let him go in alone. The room was not a standard hotel room in the sense of being bare and generic. It had been lived in, not dramatically, not extravagantly, but used in the way of a place that has been someone's second space for a long time. There were books on the small shelf above the desk, a lamp that was not the hotel lamp, photographs on the walls actually hung with small nails, which must have required permission from the hotel, personal items in the bathroom. The room smelled faintly of a perfume James recognized as Miriam's. The photographs were what he spent the most time with. There were 12 of them. Some were of Miriam, alone, candid, laughing at something outside the frame, looking out a window, reading. Some were of Miriam with the man from the funeral. They were close in the photographs in the specific way of people who are comfortable with each other's bodies, easy and unguarded. The man looked a decade younger than James and perhaps 15 years younger than Miriam. In several photographs he was clearly looking at her with something James recognized as genuine feeling, which was, in its way, more complicated than if it had been something transactional. On the desk was an envelope with James's name on it in Miriam's handwriting. He sat down in the chair by the window, the same chair she must have sat in many times, and opened it. The letter was long, 8 pages, the longest piece of writing he had ever seen from her. She had been keeping it in the room, he understood, updating it over the years, adding to it as if she expected someday to have to send it. She had not sent it. She had arranged for the man, whose name was David, to deliver the key at the funeral. She had asked David to do this, and David had done it because she had asked him to, which told James something about what David had felt for her. Miriam's letter did not apologize in a conventional way, and James later found that this was one of the things he respected most about it, because a conventional apology would have felt dishonest given the scope of what she was describing. Instead, she explained. She told him how the room had come to exist, which was that she had met David at a professional event 6 years ago and had felt something she had not expected to feel and had made a choice she was aware was wrong and had made it anyway. She told him she had rented the room initially for 3 months, intending it to be finite, and that 3 months had become for years because she had not been able to close the door. She told him what she and James had been, which she described as real and good, and also, in some way, she could not articulate precisely, not enough for her. She said she had spent years trying to understand what that meant and had arrived at the uncomfortable conclusion that it was not about James's failures, because he had not failed her. It was about something in herself that she could not explain and had not been willing to lose. She said this knowing it would hurt him and said it anyway because she was committed to the letter being true. She also told him about the money. This was the part that changed the legal character of what had happened. Miriam had funded the room and the relationship from her personal income, which she managed separately. They had always kept some finances separate by mutual agreement, but she had also, over 4 years, made a series of transfers from their joint investment account, described in the bank records as investment rebalancing, that had totaled $112,000. Some of this had gone to David directly. Gift she described in the letter with candor that James found both impressive and devastating. Some had gone to other costs associated with the life she had been maintaining. James sat in room 24 with the letter for 2 hours. When he left, he took the photographs and the letter, and everything that was personally Miriam's, and he put it in his car. He drove to his attorney's office without an appointment and sat in the waiting room until she could see him. His attorney, who had known him for 15 years, listened to the entire story without interrupting. Then she said, "I am sorry, James," and then she said, "Let us talk about what you want to do about the money." David was not legally liable for the gifts Miriam had given him because gifts cannot be clawed back simply because the giver's estate later regrets them. But the transfers from the joint investment account were a different matter. Those transfers had been made without James's knowledge or consent from a jointly held account, which meant they were potentially actionable as dissipation of marital assets. The estate proceedings were still open. There was time. James thought carefully about David before he made any decisions. He thought about the letter and the photographs and the man's face at the funeral. The way he had moved through the receiving line with the composure of someone doing something very difficult because he had been asked by someone he loved. James was not certain what he felt about David. He was not angry in the simple way. The situation was too complicated for simple anger. He contacted David through his attorney. The communication was formal and measured. James said through his attorney that he was aware of the relationship and aware of the financial transfers and that he was prepared to pursue the joint account transfers as a legal matter. He also said, and this was the part that his attorney had not suggested but that James had insisted on, that he did not intend to destroy David's life over this if David was willing to cooperate fully with the estate accounting and return the portion of the funds that could be documented as transferred from the joint account. David agreed immediately. James's attorney later told him that this response, the immediacy of it, suggested David had been prepared for this contact and had already decided how he would respond. He returned the portion of the joint account transfers that could be documented, which was approximately $78,000, through his own attorney within 3 weeks. The personal gifts from Miriam's separate income were not part of the settlement because they could not legally be part of it, but David had not been asked for those. James closed room 24 on the last day of that month. He stood in it one more time before the hotel cleaned it and reassigned it. He looked at the marks on the wall where the photographs had hung. He looked at the shelf where the books had been. He looked at the chair by the window. He tried to imagine Miriam in it. He knew her face well enough to place it anywhere. He took the brass key home. He did not throw it away. He put it in a small dish on his desk with other things that were meaningful in complicated ways: a cuff link from his father, a coin from a trip he and Miriam had taken early in their marriage, a button from the jacket he had worn on the day they met, objects that mean more than one thing simultaneously. His children knew eventually. He told them because he had decided that partial truths create their own problems, and he had seen enough of that already. The conversations were hard and then they were over. And then life continued, which is what life does. His daughter, who had been very close to Miriam, took the longest. She is still taking it, in the honest way of someone who refuses to resolve a complicated thing into a simple one. James sold the house after 2 years and moved into something smaller. He kept the books from room 24 that Miriam had left there. He had read 3 of them. They were good books. She had always had excellent taste. He does not think about David often. When he does, he thinks about a man who was handed a key at a funeral by a woman who knew she was dying and who wanted the truth to reach the person it was owed to. He thinks about what it must have cost David to walk through that receiving line and put the key in James's hand. He thinks that whatever David was, he had done something genuinely difficult out of genuine obligation. That does not make everything right, but it is something. Subscribe to Grandma Payback Stories and hit that like button if this one stayed with you. I know this story is more complicated than most, and I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Tell me about the key. Tell me about the letter. Tell me what you think of how James handled David. Tell me what you think about Miriam. There are no easy answers here, and that is exactly why I want to hear yours. New stories every single week, and I will see you in the next one.